So there was a man who was having one of those days. It seemed like the whole day was conspiring to make him late for everything that he did. I mean, even his alarm clock didn't go off because he hadn't set it right the night before. So he gets started late, he gets to work, and one thing after another slows him down and bogs him down, and he's got an errand that he's got to run after work at a store downtown, and then after that he's got to go pick up his kid from an extracurricular activity that they've got at school, and he doesn't want to be late for that. But he was hoping to get off work a little bit early, but just one thing after another came up and came up, and it was almost a half hour later than his normal time getting off work before he started heading towards his car. And then, wouldn't you know it, one of his coworkers stops him and has an urgent problem, so he's got to take a little bit of extra time to deal with that before he gets to his car. Anybody have one of those days ever, right? I think we all have, right? And so he drives downtown. The store is just about to close, and he can't find a parking spot anywhere. He's driving along, there's cars every place along the street. And then he remembers Deacon Frank's homily from 2 weeks ago about how praying is the water that causes that seed of faith to sprout and to grow. And he thinks, well, maybe I'll try that. Maybe that'll help. So just clutching onto his steering wheel, he prays, God, you know I'm in a terrible situation. God, please, oh, please give me a parking spot. And no sooner had the words parking spot left his mouth when up in front of him he sees a car pull away from the curb, and to his great joy, the spot that just opened up is right in front of the store that he's got to go visit to. So he drives up to the spot, he pulls in, he looks over at the meter, and there's even time left on the meter. So this is great, and he's all excited. And then he remembers that prayer that he just made. So he takes a breath, and he folds his hand, closes his eyes, and he says, never mind, God, I found my own spot. Anybody ever be like that too? Yeah. Well, a few weeks ago, Father Gary introduced our current homily series on the seeds of faith: praying, learning, sharing, and witnessing. 2 weeks ago, Deacon Frank spoke about the importance of prayer to water those seeds of faith that they might sprout and grow. And last week, Father Emmanuel spoke about how learning gives us that sunlight, the light to know who God is, so that we can grow in our relationship of friendship with Him. This week, we'll talk about sharing. Sharing is how the seeds of faith bears fruit in the world. You see, each one of our readings that we had today in a different way points to the importance of humility in our lives. Our first reading tells us that God hears those cries of the lowly. He hears the poor, the oppressed, the humble. In the second reading, Paul speaks of his service to the Lord, how he traveled all around the Roman Empire, spreading the gospel and being poured out like a libation. Yet through it all, and through the fact that he put a lot of effort into that, he very humbly acknowledges that it was the Lord who stood by him. It was the Lord that gave him strength. And it was the Lord that rescued him over and over and over. Finally, our gospel today contrasts that pride of the Pharisee against the humility of the tax collector. And Jesus proclaimed, much to the dismay of the crowd there, who was probably prone to think favorably of the Pharisee and negatively of the tax collector, he tells them that it was not the Pharisee, but the tax collector who left the temple justified. So what does humility have to do with sharing? Well, I think to answer that, it's important to remind ourselves of what the word humility is. You see, the word humility itself is derived from the Latin word humus, which means earth or ground or soil. Humility that was so very lacking that man looking for the parking spot is like the soil. Without that soil, a seed may sprout, but if there's no ground around for it to sink its roots into, it can never grow strong. It can never bear fruit. To be humble, we must first be grounded in the truth so that the roots of our faith have something to hold on to, something to draw nourishment from. And what is the truth? What's the ultimate truth of the universe? Well, the ultimate truth is that everything we have, everything that we are, everything that will ever be, everything we'll ever accomplish is a gift from God, even parking spots. The humble person acknowledges this, and the humble person lives in that truth and draws the attitudes that they live with from that truth. You see, since God is the source of all of our existence, God is the only being who truly exists on his own accord, anywhere, because everything else gets its existence from God. He is the one in whom we live and move and have our being. In fact, if God were ever to quit loving any of us into existence, we'd no longer exist. In philosophical language, God is the one necessary being, and everything else, everything you see, everything and everyone else is contingent on him. To deny this and think that we have something that we did for ourselves is to be just like that man who thought that he found the parking spot. But when you grow in friendship with God through prayer and through learning about who he is, you recognize how amazingly generous that he is with you. And the only natural response to that amazing generosity is to want to return it, to give back to him by sharing what he has given you with others, your time, your talent, and your treasure, giving them back to the Lord in love. You see, we share our time and our talents by being generous in service and ministry to others, helping to build up God's kingdom, just as St. Paul demonstrates by his life of mission, spreading the gospel, just as he did, as is described in that second reading. We share our treasure by being generous with what we have, not hoarding it, but using it to build up God's kingdom. Our gospel points out the attitude that we should have in sharing. Remember, in the gospel, the Pharisee bragged about tithing, so he was giving. But he didn't have a real attitude of generosity. He didn't have that attitude of humility, which leads us to truly give everything and look at everything as being God's. We share because God gave us the ability to give. And isn't what God has given us just too good to keep to ourselves? Often we talk about sharing as a mark of disciple, and when we talk about that, we think specifically just about giving to the church. And while it certainly includes this, to a real disciple, sharing is an invitation to a new way of living, a new way of thinking about all the time and the talent and the treasure that God has given to us. Today, we're called to a radical level of sharing, turning to the Lord in prayer and looking at everything that we have, our time, our talents, and our treasure, and asking ourselves prayerfully, how can I best use what I have been given to serve the Lord? To do that, we first must look at where God has placed us. What responsibilities has he given us? What needs do we see around us in our everyday life? If we have children, what do they need from us to be healthy, happy, and grow in faith? If we have relatives who have needs, material, emotional, or spiritual, how can we help them? How can we be generous with friends, with the neighbors that we live close to, with our coworkers, employees, people who serve us at restaurants, or people we encounter at other places of business? Where do we see God working through charities? Where do we see God working in the church? How can I use what God has given me to further all the good that I see God doing around me? Think of it. By our generosity with our time, with our talents, and our treasure, we can actually help point immortal souls to Christ. Imagine that. Our generosity with our perishable goods and abilities can make an eternal difference. It can make that difference in somebody's life as we turn them to Christ, showing God's generous love to them through our generosity and inviting them in turn to come to know Him through their own praying, learning, sharing, and witnessing. So how's God calling you today? How is He calling you to a greater generosity in sharing? That seed of faith might be planted in a fertile soil, taking root and bearing eternal fruit in you, in those with whom you share, and in the whole world around you.